What would you do if a homeless man asked for just $1? When Barron Trump faced this moment, his response stunned everyone. Was it a simple act of kindness or something deeper? In a world where small moments reveal true character, this unexpected encounter shows that generosity has no limits. Stay tuned. What happened next will change everything you thought you knew about compassion. On a frigid winter day in Cleveland, Ohio, fate decided to intervene on a corner where lives often brushed past each other without a second glance. James, a 42-year-old homeless man, sat slumped against a convenience store wall, his thin layers barely holding off the cold. His cardboard sign read, "Anything helps. God bless." A year of tragedy had left him on the streets, watching polished shoes and hurried heels pass by, rarely meeting his gaze. James was used to disappointment. Some days he'd collect a few coins on most people would walk by as if he didn't exist. He adjusted his worn beanie, shivering as his gaze followed the parade of indifference. But then, a peculiar pair of white sneakers caught his attention. They were too pristine, too expensive, and clearly belonged to someone far removed from hardship. The young man wearing them stood still on the corner, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the whispers and stolen glances around him. Something about the teenager seemed familiar, but James couldn't quite place him. Summoning courage he didn't realize he had left, James cleared his throat and spoke. "Hey, young man, could you spare $1?" He forced a smile, bracing himself for yet another rejection. The boy froze mid-scroll, slowly turning his head. Time seemed to slow. James expected the usual, a dismissive glance, perhaps a hurried apology. Instead, the boy's response surprised him. "What do you need it for?" the young man asked, his tone devoid of scorn. James blinked, taken aback. No one ever asked. People either gave or didn't. His voice, hoarse from the cold, wavered. "A cup of coffee. Maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky." The boy Barron Trump, though James didn't know that yet, studied him closely, his phone now forgotten. The air felt charged with anticipation. Around them, passersby began to take notice. Some whispered, others discreetly snapped photos. Barron's presence seemed to magnetize attention, but he ignored the gawking crowd. His focus remained on James. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "James," he replied quietly. "I'm Barron," the teenager said with disarming simplicity. There was no arrogance in his tone, just a sincerity that unsettled James. For a moment, the chaotic noise of the city faded. Barron did something few had ever done. He crouched down to meet James at eye level. The unexpected gesture made James shift uncomfortably. The boy didn't rush him, and something about his calm, curious presence prompted James to share more than he intended. "I lost my job when the plant shut down. My health got worse after that. Couldn't keep up with rent." He swallowed hard. "It's been downhill ever since." Barron listened, his expression serious but not pitying. James noticed the crowd gathering, phones aimed at them like spotlights. Shame twisted in his gut. He hated being a spectacle. Yet Barron's steady gaze anchored him. "No family?" Barron asked gently. "None left," James muttered. "Parents passed a few years ago. My brother, we haven't spoken in ages." Barron took a moment to absorb the words. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket. James's pulse quickened. He'd only asked for $1. But when Barron pulled out a crisp $100 bill, James froze. "You serious?" James croaked. His voice cracked with disbelief. "Why would you do that?" Barron shrugged as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "Because I can." James's hands trembled as he stared at the bill. This wasn't just money, it was a lifeline. Before he could fully process the act, Barron leaned in slightly, his voice low but firm. "This isn't just about the money," Barron said. "I want you to promise me something." James's throat tightened. "Promise you what?" "If I help you today, you help yourself tomorrow." The words hit harder than any amount of charity ever had. Tears welled in James's eyes. No one had ever cared enough to challenge him this way. His nod was barely perceptible, but it was enough. "Good," Barron said, standing up. The crowd around them grew thicker, phones capturing every second. James's face burned with embarrassment, but Barron seemed unfazed. He pulled out a notepad and scribbled something down. Handing James the note, he explained, "Go here tomorrow morning. They'll help you. Tell them I sent you." "I sent you." James unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was an address for a local shelter and resource center known for its success in helping people rebuild their lives. Barron's words carried the promise of more than just temporary relief. It was an opportunity one James couldn't afford to waste. "I'll make sure they're expecting you," Barron added. James clutched the note and the $100 like sacred relics. Hope, fragile yet undeniable, ignited in his chest. For the first time in months, he saw a path forward. He tried to find the words to thank Barron, but couldn't. His voice wavered and broke under the weight of emotion. James's voice trembled as he finally found his words. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." Barron Trump's lips curved into a faint smile. "Everyone has a story. Yours just hasn't been heard. If I can help, I should." James wasn't used to sincerity from strangers. Skepticism bubbled inside him. People didn't usually stop unless they wanted something in return. But Barron didn't flinch. Instead, he crouched again, meeting James's eyes with steady focus. "I expect nothing," Barron said softly. "But small actions can spark bigger changes." He gestured to the address in James's hand. "They have job training, counseling, everything you need. All I'm asking is for you to show up." James shuddered under the weight of years spent on the street. "What if I screw up?" "Everyone does," Barron replied gently. "Quitting is the only real failure." The sounds of the city, the chatter, honking horns, hurried footsteps faded. In that moment, it was just the two of them. "Forget them," Barron murmured. "Right now, it's just us." James exhaled slowly, his heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and shame. No one had taken the time to see him as anything other than a nuisance in years. "All right," he said, voice growing steadier. "I'll go. I promise." Relief softened Barron's expression. He stood, dusted off his knees, and glanced briefly at the crowd that had gathered. James noticed how people were filming with their phones, whispering to each other. Embarrassment washed over him, but Barron remained composed. Without saying another word, Barron turned and walked away. The crowd silently parted as he moved through the city's flow, leaving James to watch his retreating figure until it vanished. In his hand, he held a promise. Both the note and the $100 bill were tangible symbols that his life might not be lost after all. The following morning, James found himself outside Hopi Outreach, the address Barron had given him. The building loomed ahead, its facade humble but inviting. He clutched the scrap of paper and the bill tightly, replaying the encounter in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was crucial. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. Warm air greeted him, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. At the front desk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" James hesitated before sliding the note forward. "Barron sent me," he said awkwardly. Her eyes brightened as she scanned the note. "Oh, you must be James. We've been expecting you. Come on, let's get you set up." His stomach tightened with nerves, but he followed her. Soon, he was seated with a caseworker who listened to his story without a trace of judgment. Together, they devised a plan, a place to sleep, a medical checkup, and enrollment in a job training program. It felt overwhelming yet hopeful. For the first time in years, James dared to believe that he could piece his life back together. That night, as he lay on a cot in the shelter's dormitory, Barron's words echoed in his mind. "If I help you today, you help yourself tomorrow." James knew it wouldn't be easy, but the promise carried weight. He couldn't let this chance slip away. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of the shelter, events James had no knowledge of were unfolding. Someone had filmed his encounter with Barron, and the video spread across social media like wildfire. The clip showed Barron kneeling beside James, handing him money and speaking softly. Though the audio was faint, the moment's raw emotion resonated deeply with viewers. The internet exploded with reactions. Commenters debated whether Barron's gesture was genuine or a publicity stunt. Finally, some good news, one post read. Another user wrote, "Maybe we should do more than just watch." The clip garnered millions of views overnight. News anchors dissected the moment. Pundits debated the nature of altruism. And the world found itself captivated by the unexpected kindness of a teenage heir to one of America's most scrutinized families. James remained unaware of the frenzy. He focused instead on rebuilding his life. He scheduled doctor's appointments, filled out job applications, and attended workshops designed to help him regain stability. The staff at Hopi Outreach treated him with dignity, seeing him as a man in need of support, not a statistic. Fellow shelter residents encouraged him, asking about his journey. He gave them the shorter version, not realizing that his story was being broadcast to millions. A few days later, a staff member showed James a new segment featuring the viral video. Watching himself on screen hollow-eyed, his posture slumped was surreal. He hardly recognized that version of himself. Embarrassment flared, but so did gratitude. Perhaps for the first time in years, he understood that his suffering had not gone unnoticed. Meanwhile, Barron declined all interviews. He had no interest in the spotlight. Instead, he quietly directed donations to Hopi Outreach, helping them expand their programs. His refusal to engage with the media only fueled speculation. Some praised his humility, while others suspected a calculated move. Regardless, the video sparked a wave of empathy across the country. Inspired by the clip, people began launching their own acts of kindness. Hashtags like Kindness Challenge and Pay It Forward flooded social media. Donations to shelters surged, and volunteer numbers rose. Small gestures of compassion multiplied, each act reinforcing the belief that change begins with one person. James's transformation was gradual but steady. Each morning he woke with a sense of purpose. The plan he and his caseworker had crafted became a lifeline. Day by day, he rebuilt his confidence, knowing that he wasn't alone anymore. One evening in the shelter's common area, a man approached him hesitantly, his face holding a mixture of uncertainty and recognition. James glanced up from his seat on one of the worn-out chairs, narrowing his eyes as he tried to place the man's face. "James?" the man asked, his voice trembling with emotion. James squinted, searching the man's features. The familiarity grew stronger until realization hit him like a surge of warmth and shock. "John?" he whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. The man nodded. It was John, his younger brother, the one James had lost contact with over a decade ago. For a moment, neither of them spoke, their eyes saying everything their words couldn't. Relief, regret, and disbelief mingled between them. If you find these stories inspiring and they motivate you to take action, please comment 9. If not, comment 0. Your feedback means a lot to us. Thank you for your valuable time. "I saw the video," John admitted softly, sitting down beside James. "I didn't know things had gotten so bad for you. I'm sorry I wasn't there." James swallowed hard as emotion threatened to spill over. He shook his head, struggling to keep his composure. "It's not your fault," he said quietly. "I pushed everyone away. I guess I just vanished." John placed a comforting hand on James's shoulder. "I should have tried harder. I should have found you." In that small, plain room with its fluorescent lights and battered furniture, two brothers began the long process of mending their broken bond. It wasn't easy. They spoke about the lost years, the wounds that had festered in silence, and the chance they now had to rebuild. For James, it was bittersweet, a reminder of how much time had been wasted, but also a blessing that he never expected to receive. Over the following weeks, James's life began to stabilize. He visited doctors, attended job workshops, and worked with counselors to address the emotional scars that homelessness had left on him. Each day felt like one more step out of the darkness. Hopi Outreach staff treated him with respect, showing him that he was worth believing in. Their support chipped away at his self-doubt. Every conversation, every small achievement became a brick in the foundation of his new life. Other shelter residents noticed his determination. Some approached him for advice, while others simply shared how his story had inspired them. James, who once felt invisible, now found himself being seen and even admired. Meanwhile, outside the walls of the shelter, his story was still making waves. News outlets continued covering the viral video of Barron Trump's encounter with him. Clips of their conversation circulated endlessly, accompanied by debates about the true nature of kindness and privilege. Was it a sincere act of compassion, or a calculated move by someone in the public eye? The commentary didn't matter much to James. He was focused on fulfilling the promise he had made to help himself, one step at a time. Yet the impact of that single act of kindness rippled far beyond what James could have imagined. Donations poured into Hopi Outreach, enabling them to expand their resources and provide more support for those in need. The staff excitedly announced that they could now accept additional people who had previously been turned away due to limited capacity. James was humbled to know that his encounter with Barron had sparked such positive change. Still, James knew that his journey wouldn't be without challenges. One stroke of luck wouldn't erase the trauma and difficulties that had accumulated the years. But every morning he reminded himself how far he had come from sitting in the cold with a cardboard sign to having a plan for the future. He clung to that fragile but precious hope. Several times James thought about contacting Barron to thank him personally, yet he had no direct way to reach him. Part of James respected Barron's refusal to bask in the spotlight. Barron's silence felt sincere, and for James, that sincerity was what had changed everything. Outside, the world continued to debate Barron's motives. Was he a humble, good Samaritan, or had he simply stumbled into a viral moment? Barron remained tight-lipped, declining all interviews and quietly funneling donations to organizations like Hopi Outreach. His refusal to capitalize on the media frenzy only fueled speculation. Meanwhile, James kept moving forward. He applied for entry-level positions, participated in job training programs, and reconnected with John. Late at night, the brothers would sit and talk about their childhood, their regrets, and their hopes for the future. These moments of reflection helped James see his hardships in a new light. His experiences were no longer just scars, but lessons that shaped him into someone stronger and more compassionate. Eventually, the media frenzy began to die down, but its impact lingered. Local nonprofits reported surges in donations and volunteer applications. Inspired by Barron's gesture, strangers formed online communities dedicated to performing acts of kindness. They shared stories of helping those in need under hashtags like Kindness Challenge and Pay It Forward. Skeptics dismissed it as a fleeting trend, but others saw it as a spark for lasting change. James chose optimism. He had already witnessed how a single moment of empathy could alter the course of someone's life. He knew not everyone's story would unfold exactly like his, but he believed that many lives could be saved or transformed by simple acts of compassion. A few months later, James secured a small apartment through a housing assistance program. It wasn't much, just a modest space with a bed, a table, and a secondhand couch, but to him, it was monumental. On the day he moved out of the shelter, he exchanged tearful hugs with the staff who had supported him. He promised to return not as a resident, but as a volunteer. One evening in his new apartment, James sat at the table with a battered notebook. He began writing down the events that had brought him to this point. At the top of the page, he wrote, "Because someone believed in me." He thought about Barron, the staff at Hopi Outreach, and his brother John. Each of them had played a role in his journey back to stability. His mind drifted to that cold day on the street corner, the humiliation of asking for $1, the shock of receiving far more than he expected. He remembered Barron's words, "If I help you today, you help yourself tomorrow." James had kept that promise, and in doing so, he had rediscovered hope, family, and purpose. He gazed out of his apartment window at the bustling streets below. Tomorrow, he would continue his journey. He planned to apply for a permanent job and visit John. He would also return to Hopi Outreach to volunteer. The man who had once sat in despair on a sidewalk now radiated hope with every choice he made. The story of James carries within it a quiet miracle of compassion and hope reborn. On a cold street corner where James wished for nothing more than a single dollar, fate led him to meet Barron, a young man who didn't just stop to help, but gave him something far more valuable than money: faith in himself and the chance to start over. That moment wasn't merely luck, it was a ray of light piercing through the darkest days of James's life. James had endured the worst, losing his family, his job, and even hope. Perhaps he had grown accustomed to being invisible, blending into the scenery of the streets like another shadow. But when Barron sat down at eye level with him, when he didn't just hand over money, but asked about his story, everything changed. It was a rare moment when James felt truly seen and valued as a human being. That sincerity moved him deeply and awakened a spark of belief that had long been buried within him. We often think that people in misfortune need something grand to change their fate. But sometimes, all it takes is a small gesture, a look of empathy, an extended hand at the right moment. Barron's act of kindness wasn't just about giving money, it became the catalyst for a chain reaction of positive change. Through Hopi Outreach, James not only received essential support, but also reconnected with his long-lost brother, John. This story moves us because it reminds us that, even in life's most difficult moments, there is always a chance to heal and rebuild what has been lost. James didn't rely solely on the luck he encountered that day. He made a promise to Barron to never give up, and he honored that promise. Step by step, he overcame fear, self-doubt, and old wounds to create a new life for himself. This teaches us that sometimes the hardest challenge isn't accepting help. It's believing that we deserve it and that we have the power to change. James rediscovered hope, not just from others, but from the spark of resilience within himself. His story offers a profound lesson to all of us. In today's fast-paced world where compassion is often overshadowed by busyness, we must remember that even the smallest acts of kindness can leave a lasting impact. You may never know whose life you've helped turn around with a simple word of encouragement. Just as Barron didn't seek praise for his actions, we don't need to be heroes to make a difference. By pausing, listening, and offering a glimmer of hope, we have the power to change lives. James rebuilt his life and found his path again through the sincere connection between two seemingly unrelated strangers. He realized that no one is ever too far removed from life to find their way back. And the same applies to all of us. No matter where you are on your life's journey, there is always a chance to begin anew. because within each of us lies the strength to overcome even the greatest challenges so long as someone believes in us and reignites the flame of hope within. This story moves us to tears and touches our hearts because it affirms a simple yet profound truth. No one is too small to be loved, and no one is too lost to find their way back to the light.